flooding, and re-fertilizing of the clay bed. It screams for a system in which the average person, that is, the average peasant, has no political voice whatsoever. What little time is not spent on such a labor-heavy food source is claimed by the state to achieve other aims. This can get you a Great Wall or three, but it prevents the sort of labor differentiation and capital accumulation that lets a culture even dream of industrializing. Politically, the result is a system in which local authorities exercise autonomy so great that it risks bringing the system down. Even once a Chinese leader succeeds in rising to the top of his local heap, or even commanding the entirety of China, he then must begin the even longer and more painful slog of purging all those who have visions that clash with his own. Considering how fractured China is normally, and how many power centers there are, this typically requires all of the leader's attention. That was as true for the empires of old as it was for Mao Zedong, as it is for the current premier, Xi Jinping. The good news, such as it is that while the wide-open nature of the NCP makes unity very difficult, it is at least possible. As such, almost every attempt to unify China into a single nation has originated in the North. Once the North is mostly on the same page, attention invariably turns to Central China. Flowing through Central China is the mighty Yangtze, one of the world's greatest rivers. Indeed, the Yangtze River Basin boasts some 9,000 miles of the same sort of interconnected waterways that have made the United States so successful. But this does not make the Yangtze China's ticket to superpowerhood. The Yangtze is China's sole navigable river, so while it is impressive, it is a one-shot deal. Central China is the one part of the country that is naturally trade-focused and capital-rich, but it does not naturally link to its co-nationals elsewhere. The country doesn't even have a barrier island chain that might help link the Yangtze cities to the rest of the country. But the North does not see this as an argument against integration. The North needs the center's capital and so traditionally uses its superior military position to drain the center dry. The Central Chinese would prefer to not be drained dry. Given the choice, Shanghai and the rest of its riverine region tend to look beyond northern China to more developed parts of the world, whether that means Taipei, Tokyo, London, or San Francisco. As much as union between North and Center might make sense for Beijing on economic grounds, the primary reason for the North's desire to integrate is typically strategic, to keep the foreigners out. The Yangtze River Basin isn't as nice as it seems, because it isn't actually a basin like its Mississippi or Rhine equivalent. Instead, the Yangtze cuts through a series of mountain chains and ridges on its path to the sea, and along many stretches lacks a floodplain even wide enough for a footpath. Such breaks in continuity split identities rather than uniting them. This has pros and cons. On the one hand, it makes it very difficult for the Central Chinese to unify themselves into a single political entity. On the other, it makes it far easier for a unified northern China to forcibly assimilate the various pieces of Central China, one at a time. Historically, the most reliable means of unifying northern and central China has been to alter their geography physically to give them an economic linkage. The Grand Canal. Canals offer the best and worst in terms of infrastructure. Best in that they allow for linkages between various regions that would not otherwise exist, and the operating cost on a canal is quite reasonable. Worst in that crafting and maintaining an artificial river is as difficult and expensive as it sounds. So while a short canal like the Panama or Suez makes a great deal of economic sense, a massive project like the 1,100-mile-long Grand Canal is an exorbitant expense that exists only due to political rationale in a system where labor is, in essence, free. The areas that the Yangtze drains are as mountainous as its main course. The elevation means that many of the basin's 9,000 miles of navigability are seasonal and or shallow. If you eliminate any Yangtze River Basin waterways that lack a channel of at least 9 feet of depth for 9 months of the year, that figure drops to 1,700, and the number of navigable tributaries drops from over 100 to just 1. While it seems huge on a map, and the Yangtze is indeed navigable 1,600 miles inland from the coast, the area of usable territory it empowers is less than that of the Elbe. Is the Yangtze useful and worth having? Of course. Transport along it makes central China far and away the most capital-rich part of the country. But central China is neither integrated with the political core of the north, nor does its own fractured nature do anything but complicate northern China's always vexing problem of internal disunity. The Southern Secessionists. Then there is the South, which is a world apart. South China is a riot of hills and mountains extending south from the same ranges that so hobble the Yangtze. Such rugged topography has the same impact on cultural and political unity and wealth as the rough terrain in Mexico or the Balkans. Very few coherent large powers have ever arisen in the South. Aside from a short stretch of the Pearl River in the far south, none of the many southern Chinese rivers are navigable. Making matters worse, southern China is sufficiently far south that it has moved fully out of the temperate climate zone that dominates North America and Europe. Most of southern China is subtropical, with the southern coast being fully tropical. Just as the diseases native to the tropics of India or Brazil have hugely slowed their cultural unification, the same is true of China. The northern Chinese coastline is flat, shallow, and plagued by sandbars. Natural ports are few and far between, and what few exist cannot support large vessels. Even in the rare instances when northern China was united, it only rarely engaged in maritime commerce. The south is the opposite. Its coastline is both deep and severely indented, allowing easy maritime access and egress all the way to the earliest days of Chinese history. Southern China sports the majority of the natural harbors of all of mainland East and Southeast Asia. Mix the good port potential with a lack of rivers, a host of mountains, and the enervating impact of the tropics, and you get a bizarre geopolitical mix. While the Han of northern China have always had problems penetrating the area, maritime-based foreigners have not. Southern China's excellent harbors back directly into rugged highlands. Just as that rugged territory limits northern penetration or southern consolidation, it also limits the ability of any local southern power to look to the sea. They just can't reach the coast easily. Instead of the excellent southern harbors serving the needs of Chinese, either northern or southern, they instead serve as the perfect perches for outsiders. The area has long been a foreigner's playground, but one in which the locals welcomed the interference. Trapped in small inland pockets by their geography, the southern Chinese regularly collaborated with the foreigners to access the outside world. So yes, pirates and traders have long enriched themselves along the southern coast, but the locals often participated in empire as a sort of surrogate or sidekick, with Hong Kong being the most recognizable example. As early as the 12th century, southern Chinese cities were importing over half their foodstuffs, largely via such collaborative links. Entrenching the sense of regional uniqueness is that the Han ethnic group just hasn't been able to scour this part of China free of non-Han as they have in the north. This is the portion of the contemporary state that is home to most of China's remaining minority and language groups.